Father, we are grateful once again for this place and for your fellowship, your people, the lives that you have written into and have created and authored, and we are so grateful for that. And we thank you for the chance to get together and study your word. Help our speaking, our thinking, our hearing to be clear, questions and answers to be thoughtful. And not only that, not only do we learn, but that this goes into the deepest part of our hearts so that it comes out widest to the world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The series is called The Righteousness of God in the Old Testament. And the goal is to understand the entire story. So this is not a survey of the Old Testament. We don't cover every bit of it. Our first time we got together, I already told you what we're going to cover and what we're going to skip. And lots of it gets skipped, and that's kind of the reality. Anytime you do Old Testament theology of any sort, you are reducing, you're shrinking, you're picking out what's best, what's most important. And when you're doing that, it's relatively subjective. So this is my selection. Okay, and that's just the reality as well. You can feel free to disagree on that, on what I've done with the Old Testament. Okay, and our very first week we talked about the Bible in 5 acts. As a quick reminder, Act 1, God creates heaven and earth and appoints human vice-regents to rule the earth on his behalf. And that's in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Act 2, the human vice-regents rebel against their liege, leading to chaos and corruption on earth. So the basic dramatic storyline of the whole Bible is an emperor king who shares power with humanity, and the humans rebel. So that's really the starting point. The creator empowering some humans to rule on his behalf, and they said, we're going to rule on our own, and creating a divided kingdom. And that's the main source of conflict in the Old Testament, and indeed the Bible. Okay. God calls into existence the kingdom of Israel, so as his tool to end rebellion. So just as God calls humans into existence to rule the earth, he calls the kingdom of Israel into existence to help end the rebellion. And restore his rule on earth, but the kingdom joins the rebellion. So the tool rebels and goes against him as well. Act 4, and by the way, that's Old Testament, the 3 acts. Act 4, God sends his son as the embodiment of faithful Israel and calls the church into existence as his tool to end rebellion and restore his rule on earth. So that's New Testament. And in Act 5, which hasn't happened yet, God restores his rule on earth and renews all creation. That's referenced in prophetic literature as well as in the book of Revelation. And actually everybody kind of talks about in those days that's upcoming. Okay. And so where we are living is we're living in Act 4. We exist in Act 4. So this is critical. This is important. I like the part where C.S. Lewis had this discussion with Tolkien, where C.S. Lewis says, I really like these stories of the Bible, but they're mythology, they're myth. I read them as myth, they're great stories, but I don't know. And the Tolkien says, here's what you have to think. These are myth that happens to be true. Okay? And once Lewis got that, he suddenly turns around and he says, oh, I get it. I get the Bible. I think that's what we have to do. When we read the Bible, we're reading the story. It reads like, this is a story about God and humanity and this redemption, all this stuff. This is a story that happens to be true. And what happens is it explains human history better than any human history. Okay? And it explains where we are in the storyline. We are sitting in the middle, I don't know, the middle end of, people argue about this. We're somewhere in Act 4. Okay, we're somewhere in Act 4. And to understand how are we to live as actors in this particular play, you need to read Act 1, 2, and 3, and 4 and 5. Because then you know where you're going and you know where you've been. Okay. Imagine a play in which the playwright writes the first 3 acts and writes a 5th act and says, okay, now you guys, you improvise the 4th act. That's kind of the situation we're in. Okay. We have what's before and we have what's behind us and what's forward. How do we live as church, as people of God right now? We're to improvise. But that improvisation is going to be built on the previous writings and where it's going. Okay. So let's go from there. The second week we talked about creation authority. We jumped into the first act and we ended it with this, I think, a critical starting point, foundation understanding of humanity is that humans are as anointed as kings and queens. And once again, the quote from C.S. Lewis, the pressing of that huge, heavy crown on that small young head, referencing Queen Elizabeth on June 2nd, 1953, was a symbol of the situation of all men. So humanity, weak and small and inexperienced, but given great power and great responsibility. Okay, given the role of kingship, and that's where we are in Act 1. The second week we talked about the fall and consequences, and we kind of tracked through the human situation: rebellion, expulsion from the garden, causing fratricide, Cain killing Abel, and then we have boasts of violence. We have the Noah's flood and the preservation of humanity and creation from the absolute corruption of sin, and then we finally have God delivers humanity from this attempt to make humans all into one people, okay, and create multiple nations as the setup for God's salvific plan, okay. And so this is all about rebellion and such. And that was the second week. We're doing a quick review, okay. Third week, we talked about God's solution. Beginning of God's solution. We talk about the great pivot in the Bible is between Genesis 11 and Genesis 12. In Genesis 11, we have the Tower of Babel rebellion, and then we have Genesis 12, where God calls Abraham and the kingdom of Israel into existence. And the goal of this kingdom is to create a great nation that will be a blessing. How is it to be a blessing? I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. It is to create a nation that reflects God's values and God's character, so that all other people, when they see it, they say, we like it, and they join in, or they don't like it and are cursed and rejected. All right, we talked about this was the mission given to Abraham, given to Israel, and in continuity given to the church. Nothing's changed. Exactly the same mission. Now, even by this, I don't know if we talked about when we talked about this, we learned something about God's character. Right? God is an emperor who wants to reestablish his rule on earth. He could do it in multiple ways. I'd be like, well, I'll send the armies. Okay. That's not his plan. You notice this is a plan not for conquest, but for wooing. Right? This is not about conquest, it is about persuasion. This is about, I will show you a vision of what it could be like to have God and his people together. And you, in recognizing it and then wanting it, you now become part of it. And if you dislike and reject it, well, then you show yourself the kind of person who has no interest in God. Okay. It is wooing, not conquest. That's what God is up to. Okay. And we see some of that. And we talked about how Genesis 12, 1 through 3 is really kind of lays out the entire blueprint of the Old Testament, indeed the New Testament. Right? So if you want to create a kingdom, as I will make into a great nation. So what does this nation have to have? Well, the nation will have people, so 12 through 50 is the patriarchs, delivered from slavery in Exodus 1 through 9. It will have laws and constitution, and that's Exodus 20 all the way to Deuteronomy. It will have a land, Joshua. And then as the people fail in the book of Judges, we will have kings to lead them. Okay, so the entire book is working off this creation of the nation of Israel, the four elements of people, law, land, kings. Okay, and that's the structure of the Old Testament, and I would argue the New Testament is dealing with exactly the same things. Who's going to be the people of God in the New Testament? Okay, who's going to be the people? What is laws? What is this constitution? Right? How should this people live? What are they characterized by? Think about the debate that's happening with Jesus in the Gospels. They're dealing with precisely these issues. Now, land is an interesting problem, and they will show up later. But kingship, well, that's the obvious one, right? We solved that one. Jesus, Sunday school answer. Okay, but once you start seeing the scripture through these lens of these four things, the New Testament's like, oh, that's what they're really arguing about, what they're struggling with. Who's in, who's out? Jews or Gentiles? On what terms are they to enter in? Do they need to get circumcised? Is really faith enough? I mean, that's the big argument in the New Testament, right? And then, and laws. Do we worry about food laws? Do we worry about Sabbath laws? And when Jesus goes up in the temple on Sermon on the Mount, he says, well, do murder. There's actually no hating anybody. Whoa, right? He's really defining the laws of the kingdom, redefining the laws of the kingdom. Anyway, I'm jumping to the New Testament. We'll have plenty of time for that. Our last time, the 12th time we meet, sometime in May, I believe. We haven't set the date yet. Okay. And remember, we spent quite a bit of time looking at the character of the people of God, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah. Last time, we talked about the revelation of Yahweh and the revelation of his name. And so we're right around here, Exodus 1:19. And we spent some time talking about God confronting a power that enslaves his people, Egyptians, and then he reveals his name as Yahweh. And we spent a lot of time last time talking about this. What does Yahweh really mean? Nobody knows, they didn't know me as Yahweh. Now they do. And they will know I am Yahweh, this all-sufficient God who can take on the superpower of the world. And we talked about, updating that. They will know that I'm Yahweh when I wipe out the F-22s and the M1 Abrams, when I can act on the world stage and destroy the military might of the most powerful nation in the world. That's what Yahweh means. Okay. And then I know we spent half an hour on a digression last week, and that we ended up not able to finish. So we're going to jump to the last part of what we're doing last time. And we were talking about how God reveals his character, right? The law reveals his character. These people are going to live in a certain way. Why? So that people can recognize that God is with them. So we tend to read the Ten Commandments as ethical imperatives, things that we have to do. And I've been trying to get you guys to see not what we have to do, but what does it say about God? Right? So the first commandment, okay, no other God. Okay, God is to be the primary part of a person's life and a people's life. 2 and 3, no idols and do not take his name into vanity or things that are false. God cares about how he is represented. Okay, is he vain? Does he care about how people see him? And we talk about how it is necessary to see God correctly because that affects his people. Right? And then we talk about Sabbath, in which God values the idea of time and rest and rhythm. And we had this big discussion about this is we're learning something about God here. Not every Sabbath is not it doesn't automatically pop to mind like, gee, we should have that in a religion. Okay? Yet this is a God who orders it and says this reflects what I do. When you stop, you're emulating me. Because I also rested. Okay, it's part of the character of God. So we're learning things about God in the Ten Commandments. And that was the fourth one. So we're going to get to the fifth one. And 5 through 10, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I want to focus on what we learn about God through these commandments. Of course, they are ethical imperatives. Honor your parents. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. This is the fifth one. Just a couple things. First of all, honor comes from the Hebrew word kaf bet dalet, kaved. It means to be heavy. It comes out of the root meaning being heavy. So in English we have the word gravitas. Right? That person has gravitas, gravity. We're not saying that he has more gravity on him. We're not saying that he's heavier than everybody. We're saying he has social weight. Okay? He's weighty. That's the sense being given here. Treat your father and mother as being weighty, as being having high value. Okay. Now there's a whole bunch of discussion about young children. I'm going to skip all that really, and really come and go back to the question of why does God say this as part of His covenant? Remember we talked about the Ten Commandments as being kind of the summary of the covenant. Why is it here? Right? And we start realizing, okay, start thinking about, I remember we mentioned about sex in discussion about the image of God and back in Genesis 1, that men and women together, the differences, and the loving each other, two different kind of humans loving each other, becoming one, that somehow images God. That God is this being that when two different kinds of things come together, they're like, God's like, yes, this is who I am. Okay. And I think there's something happening here as well, that the relational aspect, we had the men-women relationship, and now here we have intergenerational relationship between the family. That part is showing up as well. It's like this is I'm big on this. I'm big on the family. I'm big on this. Now, people have started focusing on the family. Well, no, what I mean by this is when we value our parents, we're some way emulating God. Because now you take it straight to the New Testament, there's the Father and the Son. Right? Within the Trinity is a father-son relationship. Now, let's not get started on whether the Father actually, there's actually physically produced a son. We're not talking about that. We're saying that the father-son relationship is a model, a way for us to understand who God is. And this is a model that God chose for himself. Okay. And so that in our honoring of our parents, we're once again emulating Jesus, who honors his Father. Okay. So once again, the thing in a society in which people honor their parents, people say, and that reflects God's image. God cares about this. God thinks this is valuable. Questions on this? Is that clear what I'm getting at? Okay. There's a sense of, and this is not about submission. I didn't even notice this. Young children in the New Testament, yes, you are to obey your parents. That's pretty clear in the New Testament. But this one's really about taking care of, honoring, treating them as weighty. So it's not about submission. It's about having a person in your life or persons in your life that are different from you in significant ways. But there's obligation, and therefore treating them and fulfilling that obligation. And God is about that. Because I always think God serves as father and parents in our lives. So, okay. Keep going further. Sixth commandment, do not take innocent life. You shall not murder. The word tirtak there means take innocent life. It does not mean kill. It is not a good translation to say, thou shalt not kill. So there's no contradiction between this commandment and capital punishment. Otherwise, the Old Testament is a complete mess, because there's right afterwards there's a whole bunch of commands on capital punishment. You can disagree or agree with capital punishment, but you cannot use this verse to argue for or against. Okay. Once again, the foundation of this is that each individual is made in the image of God. So there's not to be killing of humans, because they represent God and God's power. Anytime you kill another human, you're rebelling against God in a very direct way. You're knocking over. Yes?
This was a question that came up with some people on my floor actually a few weeks ago, just
Yeah.
regarding like the concept of war. I don't know if
Okay.
it's going to take us off the topic, but
Sure.
I was just curious, is there anything biblical regarding war?
Once again, right. So the word here, tirtach, or from the root, resh tarechet, ratach, this verb is usually about killing of innocent life, dealing with murder. It's very specifically murder. So it does not preclude war. Okay. So this verse does not preclude war. It does not preclude capital punishment, and within a properly structured legal system. So no. However, you can make good arguments either way within the Bible, whether you're going to be a pacifist. There are other very good passages that you can say, you know what, Christians shouldn't fight wars. You can go that direction, but not from this verse. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Other questions? It's a good question. Yeah, there's people who propose just war theories that says Christians get involved in wars that are just. And there's been a lot of writing done on that. And then there are pacifists who says Christians should not get involved in any war of any sort, just or unjust. So, and I think that's a live debate in the Christian world. Okay. Do not commit adultery. I want to make sure to clarify what it does not prohibit. It does not prohibit polygamy, premarital sex, or divorce. And they all dealt with elsewhere. I'm not saying they're okay. I'm just saying they're dealt with elsewhere. Okay, this is very specific here. I want to define what it is, but I also want to make sure that you guys don't say, "Oh, Charles says it's perfectly fine." No, he didn't say that. He just says they're dealt with elsewhere. For example, you will find that those who have consensual premarital sex are required to marry, because sex is a sign of the marriage covenant. If there are no real objections, a premarital sex should become the basis for marriage, and that's something that shows up in the Old Testament. What I'm getting at is that, once again, it is the exaltation of the marriage relationship as the reflection of the image of God. And so it's put straight into the covenant. You notice God really cares about family relationship, marital relationship, father, son, mother, daughter, that filial relationship. All of these relationships reflect God's image. If you get these basic human relationships right, they reflect who God is. Okay. Why? Okay. So I submit, this is the kind of crazy part, I submit that these relationships are more difficult for us than the other relationships. Friends you pick. If you don't like him, you dump him, move on to another friend. So you end up picking the ones that are the easiest for you. Okay? Families you don't pick. And they can get tough. And you are so close to each other, you're so intimate with each other, that they become troublesome. And I think most of us come with some kind of baggage dealing with our families, our family of origin that we go through. And there's things that you probably don't want to talk about right now. It's like, oh great, don't bring this up, Charles. Okay, and I have things I can bring up just as easily. So having that relationship, working on that relationship, making that relationship work, that reveals God's character. Because God's about intimate relationships of people who are difficult to get along with. Okay? And that includes marriage. Because even though these are the days we kind of pick and choose a bit, but fundamentally, it's a man and a woman. Okay? You might find somebody who's really similar to you. You might not. Chances are you probably can't find somebody who's exactly like you. And so what ends up happening is we're set up, as I was giving this talk in Northwestern a few weeks back. One of the Ivy staff down there, he listened to the talk. He says, "So you're saying in marriage we're set up for conflict?" I said, "Yeah. Marriage is the coming together of two different kinds of humans and becoming one. So that images God. So we're set up for conflict. We're set up for the hard work of loving. Loving yourself is easy. Loving people who are exactly like you is a piece of cake. Loving difference is the hard part. And that is that love that reveals who God is. So the preservation and the protection of familial relationship, marital relationships is critical in the Ten Commandments because of how these relationships function to reveal God's character." Okay. Questions or comments on that?
This is really difficult because it just gives you a sort of, it assumes that you know what a marriage looks like and what parents are actually supposed to be like. It somehow assumes that that's all going to be super godly.
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't assume it at all, which is why you need to command it. Right? It assumes that you're going to do so badly at this that God says, you know what? I'm sticking it in the Ten Commandments. I'm putting it as the essence of our covenant. I'm going to call it this is the covenant. You have a mission to bless the world. How are you going to bless the world? Have a good marriage. Really? How are you going to bless the world? Honor your parents. In doing so, the world's going to go, whoa, you guys are so different from everybody else. This is supposed to be special. This is meant to be difficult. If it is easy, it wouldn't be in there. God doesn't say, eat food every breakfast. It doesn't say that in the Commandments, even though everybody does it. That's precisely the point. Everybody does it, which is why it doesn't show up in the covenant. It is difficult. Okay, nobody says this is difficult. This is easy. Okay. Now you're saying, oh, well, I can probably get through it without adultery. It is hard, and Jesus, actually pushes it further. He amplifies this law, right, in the New Testament. So, yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in a Christian family where honoring your parents was held over your head.
Oh dear, yes. Filial piety, yes.
It isn't easy.
No, not at all. And I would say it's in here precisely because it is not, and because it is not easy, because it's the great challenge. To the extent that we're able to do it, it reveals God's character. It reveals God's love. The love for that is difficult. That is different from us. So, good question. Yeah. No, I don't. No, people think, well, you're not killed. Is that really easy? Should that really need to be in there? I just want to point out negligence shows up in the Old Testament laws. That there's really a concern for human life beyond don't kill. Okay, it's do not do anything that puts other people's life at risk. Which then gets to us, I would say today, in speeding. Something as simple as traffic laws. Okay, I'm just like, wow, we're touching on things like this in our behavior. Drunk driving, sure, whatever, but traffic laws. If you're going way too fast, are you risking this? And if you're risking it, you're in essence you're breaking it in some ways. You know, if you have a cow that habitually gores people and you don't lock it up, okay, you are breaking this commandment. So, okay. Now in saying that, I actually drive kind of fast. So I'm not exempting myself, and in fact that's the reason I come to my head, because that's kind of the area which I have problems with.
My car's locked up now. Does that help?
Yes, good job. Is that your goring ox?
Yeah.
It's a habitually goring ox. Okay, look out. Okay, and this one too. Okay. Do not steal. This is an interesting one. And once again, I'm not focused on the ethical imperative for us, because I think everybody teaches that. But what does it say about God? That God is into the preservation of individuals' property. And that somehow reveals God's character. That's interesting. So it's not a communist paradise, heaven. So just from this line alone, you realize in the eschaton, we'll have our own property. It's not share and like, right? There's something right and proper of have something that's your own. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I have something, and we have objects in our lives that we really like. Right? Like, this is a special meaning for me. This is mine. My precious. Okay, no. No, not quite. But you know, you have things that you really dig. Like, this is my thing. This is my identity. And I really like this thing. And I don't want other people touching it. I don't want other people playing with it. I don't want other people breaking it. And we have this jealousy toward our property, our objects. And look in your room, you have things like that. Maybe. I do. Okay. And God said that's okay. In fact, He's actually enshrining that in the Ten Commandments. He says, it's okay for you to have that. In fact, we want to make sure other people don't take it from you. Okay? We're protected in our property. How does this reflect God? You will find, well, actually, I don't find, we talked about this last week in Exodus 19. God says, the whole world is mine, but you will be my special treasured possession. Sagula, you're my own thing. The rest is mine in the sense the king owns the nation. But you're mine in the sense that this is mine. Okay? You will be mine. There's this very intimate relation that God has with His property. And it talks about having a zeal. God has a zeal, a jealousy for the things that are His. Okay? So we're getting at something about God here. Now, God doesn't have to be this. You can easily imagine a God who doesn't care about this, I think. But He would act very differently. Okay? Our God has ideas of things that are His, and He cares about them. And there's a sense of exclusivity to them, that they belong to me and not to somebody else. So when His people worship another God, He gets mad about that. Okay? And I think that's reflected in the respect for individual property. It's an interesting idea about who God is and why He should decide to put this in His covenant, in the hand of this foundational part of His covenant. Any question on this? Yes.
I just was interested then, because I totally understand this. So then, is this kind of just saying regarding the New Testament when it's like, what's mine is yours, is a big emphasis, like sharing with your neighbors? Like, is this just kind of, I don't know, that's just an interesting concept, I think.
Yeah.
I've seen that in my own life where it's like, oh, this is mine, but then God's been like, Becky, share.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So it's a very good question, and I would point out that initially the church went that direction with Peter, and they were selling everything and sharing everything. That stopped. Okay, that stopped, and there's nothing in the text that suggests that we should emulate that. Okay. give property to the poor. Love those as yourself. The idea of giving is definitely a big part of this. But you notice there's a big difference from giving than being stolen from.
Yeah.
Right? It's a huge difference. Giving is something that we do voluntarily. I want to share this. But we are protected within our realm. These are my things. Now, if God has moved my heart to share with them, go for it. But nobody can take it from me. That's the key. That we're protected from that. Okay. So I think you're right. I think there's great push for generosity. I think there's great push for sharing. But that does not then flips us over into, therefore we lose all concept of ownership. It is precisely because we have ownership that we can share. If we don't own it, there's no sharing going on. There's no ownership, there's no giving, there's no generosity. Generosity is dependent on ownership. Right? Once again.
What about that whole, if someone takes your cloak, give them something else also?
Give them a shirt also? Yeah, that's a good question. That's going to take us down to a slightly different road. I don't think it's a renunciation of personal property idea, because once again, if somebody takes your cloak, give the shirt also. That's if somebody is taking your cloak, you're being robbed. They are breaking the Ten Commandments. Okay? Your response is not retaliation. Your response is, now I voluntarily give you something of my own. Right? It's a call for a response to affront. Somebody slaps you on one side, you turn the other cheek and let them slap the other side.
Makes you go 1 mile, have them
Go 2 miles. It's about what happens to you when people assault you and break the boundaries against you. The response is not retaliation. The response is absorbance of that evil and turning that evil and using and do good with it. To say, you know what, you want to do this to me? I'll give you even more of it. But it's a free choice. Okay. So does that mean that person is not wrong in stealing from you?
But shouldn't you say something like, stop stealing from me?
That's a good question, and I think that's a good point, and I think Jesus is pushing to something different there. So here it's talking about the foundation is don't steal. Foundation is wrong to be stolen from. It is right to have personal property. This is what's establishing. And now on top of that, Jesus builds on another layer of ethics that says, now that you've been stolen from, what are you going to do about it? Okay. Now that you have been violated, what are you going to do? Now that you realize that your world, the world of the covenant, of the kingdom of God, the value system is now smacked into this world system that doesn't respect this value system. It's just somebody will steal from you. Somebody will rob you and say, give me your coat or give me this. What are you going to do about it? And Jesus' response is, okay, one response is revenge. Another response is, you know what? You need my coat, I'm going to give you my shirt. Okay. I'm going to give you my shirt. It's still my shirt. Right? I don't give up the concept of ownership. I don't give up the concept that cloak was mine. But now that I'm giving my shirt, in a sense, I'm giving everything to you. It's a response to but it doesn't undermine this. In fact, I think it builds on it. If no such thing as this, then you have no response to take. They take your coat, oh, that's not mine. Right? There would be no response at all. So.
Charles?
Yes.
Isn't it a little bit dangerous to say these things in our current moment? Because in some ways this is setting the ground for what the city should look like. I mean, this is the ideal, but we live in a world which we know is far from ideal.
Yes.
And perhaps all this tells us is that it's not ideal, but then to kind of enforce it is conservative, and I mean conservative in the sense of reproducing existing power structures.
Right.
And
Right, exactly. Now that if you have, so you're saying, okay, now if you have a society in which we have very strong, a disproportionate distribution of wealth,
right.
and then the wealthy people says, you can't take from me, I got it all, right? So what in a situation, what do we do, right? That's a very good question. Let me back up and say, first of all, having individual property rights does not then mean, does not entail what you just talked about. You're absolutely right that it could, but in the prophets, you will see nonstop
Over again.
cries for social justice. That the rich is getting too rich, the poor is becoming poor, and that there is now this exploitation going on. Okay, so you're absolutely right. And the Ten Commandments did not seem to have economic justice, social justice built into it. Okay, which is why I think the Ten Commandments is building the very lowest ethical structure. These are foundational structure. Okay, now that you have property rights, how do we then, on top of it, build a society that is more just and more equitable? Okay, but the difficulty is that in trying to achieve equitable society, if we undermine individual property rights, you will affect something. You will destroy something valuable. I think that's what we're getting at, and that's I think the great debate between the national ownership, the communism, and others who are saying, look, you're throwing out something, the baby with the bathwater. You're trying to achieve something, but you're undermining something that's absolutely critical. What we need in the people of God is having property and then having the call to share and to give generously.
And Charles, I think
Yeah.
there's something really critical about the people that this covenant is being given to.
Yeah.
They have been slaves for 400 years. You're writing this covenant to a bunch of slaves and
Yeah.
saying, the real critical relationship is not your relationship with the feudal lord, it's actually with your parents.
Mhm.
The real critical thing, a slave never had the chance to own
Okay.
property, but you know what?
You
I'm
get property.
affirming You and
Interesting.
affirming everybody
Yes,
has property.
yes.
I think that's how it ought to be
Yes.
read. But especially in America, I think
Yeah.
it's terribly problematic that we constantly say, we need the commandments in the classroom, and have no idea
Right.
that they are
Right.
actually supporting rights for the black kids in the ghetto, literally.
Right,
I
right.
think that's what this is talking about. And I don't know this sometimes when we read it,
Right.
this can...
Well, let me back up and say, first of all, this is a commandment given to Israelites. You're absolutely right. In that, is there really a sense which we should turn this into laws in our country? That's for a different topic. In fact, that's a very different topic, and I would actually it is not obvious to me that we should do that. Okay, it's not obvious to me that we should do that. In the New Testament church, I don't think it is the push of every Christian to make the Ten Commandments the law of their country. I don't think that's where we should be at all. So I hope that answers your question. This is about God revealing himself to the ancient Israelites and using the ancient Israelites, if they can live this out, revealing God to the rest of the world. The church, I think, not United States, but the church should think about this. Okay, the church should think about this.
Really quickly, jumping with a commercial break. I made some hot water for tea if anybody wants tea. And there's many and tea bags there. Help yourself anytime.
Thanks. Okay. Do not bear false witness. Do not make false accusations. Do not lie about another person in court. A wider application: do not damage the reputation of another person. I just mentioned in second and third commandment, God cares about his reputation, how he is imaged. And he's saying the same thing. You notice it's all related to him. He's saying the same thing about humans. Humans are also concerned about their reputation, how they're viewed by others. And that is a right thing. So therefore you need to protect that. Okay? Now, it doesn't say do not lie. Okay, I just want to pull that out. It does not say do not lie. It's do not bear false witness in court, usually to the detriment of the other person. Okay, there's nothing in the Bible that tells you, that gives you the blanket statement, do not lie. Okay, it's just not there. The typical question people throw at you is, you're in Nazi Germany and you have Jews hiding in your basement, and they ask you, do you have Jews in your basement? You say what? I say no. And
Absolutely not.
absolutely not. There's nobody here, none whatsoever. Go search the thumb of the house. Not even close. Okay, not even. There's no debate about this one from a biblical perspective. In fact, Rahab did exactly the same thing in Jericho. When the Israelite spies are in there, hey, they're in your house. No, they're in our house over there. And they were rewarded. There's no condemnation of her whatsoever. Okay. Question.
Another type of, not with the Nazi example,
Yeah.
but, is like in Proverbs it says like those 6 things the Lord hates, 7 things that are detestable to him, and one of them is like a lying tongue.
Yes.
So what is that? How does that
Right.
apply?
So the question is it a blanket statement of any kind of lies, or are there lies that do certain things? And so I would say those kind of remarks deal with lies for self-interest. Okay?
Okay.
There are lies that are for self-interest. There are lies. Look, put it this way. The Bible wants to treat us as adults, mature people who are like, you know what the good thing is. It's to do the thing that's good. Like if your lie is going to lead to the death, if you tell the truth, will lead to the death of these innocent Jews, then don't get them killed. That's crazy. The people who are going to do horrible things with that information. Don't do that. If your wife asks you, "How do I look?" You look fine, dear. That just comes right out. Stephen, just
No taking, but easy.
yeah, huh? Easy. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, take it. He's engaged. Okay. Just kind of it's just how it goes. Okay. Now, am I lying? I'm not going to get specific. All I'm saying is, think about it, right? It's not a blanket prohibition, and you certainly won't get this in this passage. Okay, this passage is specifically about bearing false witness in a situation of a court trial, usually to the detriment of the other person. Okay, you're lying about them to get them in trouble in court, get them punished, get them in jail. And really, you're trying to not to damage the reputation of the person. That's what's really happening. Okay. So 4 fundamental rights to people: right to life, right to home, right to property, right to reputation. Really, I mentioned that, and actually I didn't mention this, but people have made the point that the Old Testament, especially the Ten Commandments, exalt the individual. Because underlying it, the individuals reflect God, the image of God. So there's a tremendous respect for the individual. God has a tremendous respect for individual human beings. That's really a hard thing hard to conceive of that. But God respects individuals tremendously. He loves individual human beings and he respects them, their decision making, their choices, and their actions, and for them to bear out the consequences of their actions. Now, I frankly disagree with God a lot of times. I wish he would do less respect. Okay, when a person is about to attack an innocent child, I wish that God would alter the laws of physics so that that person's blow or that person's injury would stop and be prevented. But God doesn't do any such thing. Right? God doesn't stop genocide. God doesn't stop rape. God doesn't stop violence. He lets everybody carry out their actions. There's almost a sense where God created humans, and he says, you know what? I created beings kind of like little versions of myself, and I would not want to violate their dignity. So even if they rebel, I'm not going to crush them. I'm going to persuade them to come back. And if they're going to just do horrible, horrible things to each other, I mourn, I am saddened, but I'm going to let it happen. Okay. That's all part of this respect for humans that lies at the heart of who God is. Okay. Which is why we respect humans. Because God does.
Charles?
Yes?
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word dignity because my question was going to be that right to reputation seems to be, to remind me at least of right to dignity.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem that the 9th commandment is talking about bestowing someone dignity.
No, it's everything's negative. You're absolutely right. So I'm actually converting everything around. You notice this is a turning around. Every negative is turned to a positive. So do not kill means you have a right to protection of your life. Do not commit adultery means your marriage life is protected, right? There's a right to having a proper marital life that isn't being affected by others. And then do not steal means you have a right to your property, and do not bear false witness means a right to reputation. So the negative, if everybody in your society follows the negatives, it turns into a positive for you, right? That aspect of your life is preserved. So reputation, I would say all of this gives you dignity, right? Because underlying all of this is your worth as a human being in reflecting the image of God.
We've talked about the Sermon on the Mount in two different ways. One of them is the cloak shirt, 1 mile, 2 mile
Right.
set, which seems to be about a willful forfeiting of the rights described here.
A way of responding to the involuntary forfeiture of those things, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And then there are also Jesus' expansions on these as prohibitions.
Yes.
So, how then do those two responses to these laws
Mm-hmm.
work together? Because one is treating it as rights, and so this is the response to when your rights are violated.
Right.
And the other is a response as directives. Is that
Right.
just affirming that it is indeed both directive and
Okay. Great question. Let's not take too much time on this, but because we're not doing New Testament yet. But let me note that you're actually right about the two things. One is God says you should have these things. What if they're not given to you? What is the response? Okay. Vengeance. Okay, revenge, attack, counterattack, whatever you want to call it. That's the typical response. You steal from me, I'll steal from you. You hurt me, I'll hurt you. So what I'm saying is all of those ones that you talked about, they're not a forfeiture of these rights. They're saying now that they've been violated involuntarily, nobody voluntarily asked to be stolen, because if that is the case, you're not being stolen from. Okay, so if somebody takes your cloak, that's an involuntary act. If somebody slaps you in the face, it's not like I'm going, please slap me, please slap me. That's not what's going on. But now that you have been slapped, now that you have been publicly shamed, what do? So I'm saying Jesus is calling for a change in response to violation of basic human dignity. He's saying the people in the kingdom of God, just as God's response is not to crush the rebellion, but to woo and to persuade, that his people work the same way. When their basic dignity is hurt, is impacted, we surrender the right to retaliate. Rather, we overcome it with good. So you want my cloak, I'll give you my shirt. You want to slap me here, go ahead and slap this one. You want to insult me further. I give you the right to insult me further. Okay. On the other side, the prohibition ones, they seem more extensions. Don't kill. Okay, yeah. But you know what? Killing is pretty darn minimal, frankly. Okay? If all you're going on is saying, I'm not killing anybody, you're not saying a whole heck of a lot about being the people of God. And what we're getting at really there is insult words that harm people. When you call people names, you're hurting them. So we're really taking ethics to the next level. Right? Sticks and bone may break my bone, names will harm me. In the New Testament, that actually is rejected. Right? Not hitting somebody is not good enough. Okay? Your respect for people needs to go to the heart of their being in terms of being concerned for their own hurts. They can so insults are prohibited. Hatred is prohibited. So we're taking it further. James.
It's with giving up preference when Jesus says whoever will save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.
Yeah.
So how does that have to be?
All right. It's a good question. We're going to have to keep moving on because you realize that we're actually still dealing with the lecture from last week. This is hopeless. Okay. I should have known 10 Commandments was going to take a long time. So he will save his life will lose it. Who save his life will... I think he's not dealing with this there, right? And that passage, I'm gonna have to look at it more closely. He is talking about self-preservation, and whereas Jesus is calling him to a radical life of self-denial. which is different from this. Okay, God. What we're saying here is you have the right to all this, and then Jesus, and then when He's calling you to give them up, surrender them, which is what we're getting at. You have a right to property. Now be generous. You see how that works? You have a right to a reputation. Now give that up for the sake of the kingdom.
So what does right mean then?
It is properly yours. This property is properly yours. When you give it away, it is an act of generosity. If it's not properly yours, giving away means nothing. It's not yours to begin with. So all of the virtues of generosity, of self-denial, are founded on human dignity and rights. Without them, you're not doing anything that's... And so once again, it's no big deal. It's no big deal giving away things that are not yours. Right? There's no big deal to surrender things that you never had a right to anyway. Okay? So the Christian life isn't one that says, oh, I have no rights. It's one that says, I have rights, but then I deny them. I surrender them. Okay? Did Jesus have a right to live in a life without being killed under false pretenses? To be executed for unjust things? Yeah, I think so. He has a right to live in a society that he doesn't get executed for under false accusations. Yeah, but he willingly underwent it. He surrendered his right. And that's what makes this Christian sacrifice make sense of it. Right? To have it and then just surrender it. Yes.
John, one last point.
Okay.
Question.
Okay.
I mean, is there something to be said that there is a whole lot of tension actually in all that we said? Yep, the right bearers are individuals, and to that extent very similar. All that she said is very similar to the Human Rights Declaration as well.
Yeah.
Inalienable rights, which are cited in individuals, and yet these rights are also fundamentally relational in nature.
Yes.
That tension, and then there's the tension of this is what reflects God, and yet at the same time, Christ as God reneged all of those rights.
Right. And once again, context is critical. What you said previously is that you must remember, why would these rights make people go, wow, you guys are amazing? It's because they live in a society, in an ancient world, which knows no such protection. Right? So the understanding of the ancient world is that humans are slaves, God's slaves. So and the individual human beings, their lives are crushed, they're irrelevant. They're shadows. They're not important things. So I know that in North America now, we're in a situation in which this has taken hold so much that we swung way to the other side, where individual rights are so focused upon, so enshrined, that I think we completely lost the sense of responsibility to the society. But you must remember, this was written not for such a case. Okay, in the ancient world, human lives were flies. They're worthless. You know, an emperor's kill off a bunch. Who cares? And for God to come along and say, you know what, I care about the individual, it was a big deal. I know that sounds kind of old hat now, okay, because we live in 2,000 years after in the Christian world, but it was revolutionary back then, and it's still revolutionary in many parts of the world today. When you hear that God cares about the individual, that's a shocker. Good. Okay. We need to move on. The final one is coveting, and let's just keep going. Because if I start that, oh my goodness. Okay. So coming together to today's lecture. What? We're talking about the failure of God's people from Mount Sinai to Canaan. If you look at this map, this little kind of trajectory, this table of contents of the primary history, Genesis through Kings. Patriarchs we looked at the Levirate, we looked at the laws. We actually didn't look at all the laws. We looked at the Ten Commandments. We're going to look at the cultic laws. You know, all the exciting stuff about building the ark and all that kind of things later on. And I'm also jumping past Joshua straight to Judges. And the reason for that is because the land and temple and cultic laws really come together nicely. And what I want to talk about is that we want to jump to failure first. And the reason failure comes first is because failure happens right in Exodus. And it extends all the way through, and we have a complete collapse of the people by the end of Judges. And at that point, the story gives up on the people and say they can't do any of this. And what we need to do is we need to have kings. Okay, we need leaders who will help us out because the people can't do this. Okay. So we get this idea, this hint immediately. Okay, and this is Moses talking, and if you get a chance to read Deuteronomy, this is really right at the end of the books of the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, right? And in chapter 29, Moses goes into this warning mode. He says, once you get into the land, Deuteronomy is a speech that Moses gives before they cross into the promised land of Canaan. And he says, when you go in there, don't forsake the covenant. Like, he gives them a serious warning. Okay. After the warning comes chapter 30, which is bizarre, because he assumes that they will absolutely fail, that they will forsake the covenant. So he gives this warning, and then chapter 30 he says, oh, by the way, when all these blessings and curses I have said before you come on you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations. What? When you go into exile, look, this is a great way to start a nation, isn't it? Just remember, Martin Luther King says, I have seen the promised land. I'm not going with you, but you're going to get to the promised land. Well, this is Moses saying, I have seen the promised land. You're going to go there, and then you'll live there for a while, and because you'll betray God, you will get kicked out. And you will be absolutely dispersed among the nations. And when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey Him with all your heart, with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from the nations where He scattered you. It's going to go out like this, and then God's going to bring you back. This happens before they even step in. Okay, it's kind of awesome. It's like, thanks, Moses. Really vote of confidence there, Moses. But the thing is, how does Moses know this? Because Moses knows the people. He's been with them the past 40 years, and it's been a disaster. Okay, we're going to touch on that briefly. Yes?
Isn't there a song that God says in Deuteronomy that, like, I know these people will turn against me once they go into the land?
Well, this is all part of it, yeah. There's 29:30 is where he says, 29 is a very strict warning. You're going to be tempted to do this, you're going to be tempted to do this, and you're going to forsake the covenant, and then boom, you're going to be exiled. And when this all has happened, God's going to call you back. Okay? So there's going to be faithfulness beyond the exile. If this all happens before they get in. Love it. Okay. Not just him. The next leader, Joshua, after he's had his time dealing with the Israelites and leading them and conquering Canaan, this is what he says. You are not able to serve the Lord. He just says, don't sign a covenant with him. You can't pull this off. Don't do this. It's not worth it. Why sign a covenant with God when you can't do it? Right? He's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, He will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after He's been good to you. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. So they're going to do it. And so they did. They did a covenant with Him. Yes?
Was this just something that I've heard some teachings done lately of just the concept of like, who is God and that He didn't bring wrath on people, so that a lot of this stuff from the Old Testament wasn't really like things that happened where like wrath was brought on people, etc. It wasn't actually God Himself, but it was like people who wrote the scriptures like took down the situations incorrectly. So it's like the concept that God is light and He's like not for all these different things. So that was not God. It was just. So I don't know what you think of that.
I think that a lot of people they're trying to protect God's reputation. And what happens is they find the things that are in the Bible offensive in some ways. They think like, oh, God bring judgment on His people. That doesn't sound right. So we need to protect God from that. I think we sometimes do things, we read scripture, we say, no, that God couldn't have done that, so we try to help Him out. So I would say whoever is teaching that, they're obviously saying, they're not teaching the Bible, they're saying that the Bible is wrong about certain things, right? The biblical authors took down the wrong things.
Yeah, that it's
Right.
not like complete, like their perceptions were
Right,
off.
right. So, but how do they know that? Do they have access to a different version of the history? And the answer is no, because there's no other text from back then, which means they are substituting their assessment of what happened. They're substituting what the biblical authors write with their own assessment. They're basically saying they're right, they're wrong, I'm right because I think this way. Because God couldn't have done that. They have their own preconceived notions of what God can and cannot do. So my response is, I teach the Bible. So I teach what the Bible teaches. I don't teach what people think or, speculate might have happened. Okay. So it's a good question, but then you get into the question, which is, does God do judgment? And the answer is yes. At least according to the biblical authors, he does.
Yeah, I was going off of the concept
Yeah.
of Ananias,
Yeah.
just killed. So is it as a Christian, if I mess up, is God going to smite me?
Right. Well, here, okay, now, and this is where I know when we do the prophets, we're going to make this painfully clear. It is not about making tiny mistakes. I know I make this point over and over again, but it's not that the Torah is so hard when we screw up every little bit, one little bit, and God gets mad. The line is not line 27 of Leviticus 17, where you the cleanliness laws you screwed up on. That is not it. The line is what? It is the first commandment: forsaking the Lord and serve foreign gods. Don't break the first one. You can probably break all the other ones and be okay, frankly. Think of David. David broke 5, 6, 7. He broke a bunch. He killed, adultery, he coveted, he intent. He broke a bunch. Okay?
In like a week, right?
Huh?
In like a week.
In like a week. In like a week. He broke a whole bunch. And God says, this is one of the best kings ever. A king after my own heart. I dig this dude. Like, wow. Okay? From his progeny will come Jesus. Okay? So wait a minute. What's going on? Don't break the first one. Because the first one is the foundation to the covenant. The first one says, if you worship other gods, there really is no special relationship between you and God. Okay? Between this people and God. Don't break that one. Everything else God can forgive and he'll work around. Okay, don't mess up the first one. And that's what they keep getting at. You're going to do... Joshua makes the same point. Don't break the first one. Why do they keep saying that? Because it happened. And you saw this in a GFM not GFM, sorry, Ivy Grad 2 weeks ago with Kevin, the Golden Calf Rebellion. So Moses brought, God spoke the 10 Commandments, and the people said that was kind of scary. Can you just go up there and talk to God directly, and we'll just hang out here at the foot of the mountain? So Moses goes up, and he hears all the other laws that are being promulgated, and the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain. They gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Moses disappeared. Aaron answered him, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off the earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then he said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Okay. So whether you want to take this as idolatry or syncretism, whatever you want to do with this, what's going on is they broke the first and the second. Right there. For commandment, the heart of the covenant. Now, if you want to, and God uses this, marriage metaphor all the time. So the metaphor here would be having an affair on your wedding night. That's what's going on. Okay, the people immediately broke the commandments. Not any the easy ones. They broke the first one, the second one, right there. That's a problem. That caused a big mess. They traveled out of Mount Sinai to this place called Kadesh Barnea, right here, where they're going to attack into Canaan. They sent spies to spy out the land, and they walked around for 40 days and 40 nights. They came back and they made the report that said, "Good land, tough people. Okay, they're going to be really big and really tough, and we won't be able to beat them." And that night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. They're crying. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Okay. So, obviously his people have not learned the lesson of what it means to be Yahweh. Right? The Yahweh who can defeat Egypt can definitely take out a bunch of city-states in Canaan, but somehow it just doesn't clue into these people that we can trust this God who can take out the superpowers, right? They have this problem, and this is giving up of the covenant. This is not just let's go back to Egypt. This is like we're going to give up our identity as God's people and to be His chosen people here. We're going to go back and be slaves in Egypt. Let's go back home. Being slaves is better than following God. God comes up, shows up, gets really mad and says, okay, after talking to Moses, the decision is you need to circle around here for 40 days and 40 years so that all the adults who said these stupid things will die. You won't get to see it. But your kids, who you said will be taken as plunder, they'll get in. I'm guaranteeing it. Kind of like irony. Okay, I'm going to make sure the kids you say, the little ones right now they're running around, they're going to get in. So they circled around for 40 years, and then they went all the way around to this side and crossed over on that side with Joshua. Okay, so we have this major problem of failure from the very get-go that people fail. Okay, and the question is, will they get better somehow? And the answer is they don't. And this takes us to the book of Judges. There's one generation that was decent. That was Joshua's generation. They get in, they conquer the land. There was failure in there too. And then the next book comes along, and it's probably one of the darkest, I would say the darkest, most depressing book in the Bible, if not all of ancient literature. Okay, so dark times coming, guys. Okay, and
I think Judges is dark.
Judges is a dark book. Have you had a chance to read it? How many of you read it recently? Yeah. So you know the details in it. Okay. Well, this might help you understand what's going on. This book, this is trending toward the idea of failure, an absolute failure. And the chapter 2 names off the cycle. Okay. But it's really not a cycle as much as a downward spiral. So you begin with the rebellion. And the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and to serve the Baals. The Baals are the Canaanite gods. And Yahweh's response, they aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreth. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around. And then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. And the people's response is, yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostitute themselves to other gods and worship them. Okay. And then, wherever the Yahweh raised the judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them from out of the hands of the enemies as long as the judge lived. For Yahweh relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. And then, but when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. So these words are verses right out of chapter 2. It's describing to you the cycle, and there's really no recovery. It just keeps getting worse. Okay. And the cycle is established in chapter 2, and then the rest of the book of Judges is a series of cycles. I'm naming the major judges. There are also minor ones that are like getting 1 or 2 lines. We don't really have time. These are judges in which there's actually stories about them. These last 2 are not stories of judges. They're kind of the concluding notes on the absolute nadir of Israelite history.
Doesn't that guy get like tricked into sacrificing his daughter?
Just go. Just watch. Okay. We have. So it's a downward spiral. We're gonna do our pick your own adventure time again. Okay. We don't have time to do them all. I will give you a little hint and clue. Don't do Othniel, it's boring. Because it's just really just a model judge. It's like 4 verses, he does great. Everything's perfect. It fits the cycle perfectly.
Othniel is Caleb's nephew, right?
Son-in-law, yeah. And then we have Ehud, which is, if you want into eschatology and body functions, we can go with that one. Deborah, if you're into, what's the word? bloodthirsty Schadenfreude, go with Deborah. If you're into like stupidity and coward machismo, go for Gideon. If you go with just simple cruelty, go with Abimelech. You want to go with heartbreaking, go with Jephthah. You want to go with like as dumb gets, you go with Samson. And then we'll probably skip epilogue 1, and we'll probably say a little bit about epilogue 2. So what are these? Maybe we can do like 3 of these. Yes.
I want to hear Deborah.
You want to hear Deborah? Okay. Who else?
Jephthah.
You want to hear Jephthah? Okay. Deborah, Jephthah. Okay. Let's skip Samson. Everybody knows Samson. You guys know he's an idiot, right? Anybody wants to be convinced otherwise? Read the story again with the absolute idea that this is the stupidest human being you've ever met. And then you go, oh, yeah, of course. Oh, wow. That is stupid. Oh, my gosh, really? He did that? Oh, my God, that is stupid. Okay? There's a line in which he says, I killed thousands with a jawbone of an ass. And it's kind of meant to be clever because God can say the same thing. Which is, here's a jawbone of an ass, and I killed thousands of that with him. So, okay, let's skip him. Let's skip.
Your commentary on Samson might be really delightful, though. So.
There's nothing to be said, and you know the Delilah story. You just read it and going, seriously? You really gonna do that? Oh, really? Just go home and read it. It's hilarious. He's an idiot. He's treated as an idiot in the whole book. And the reason the book ends with him is because you cannot go any lower as a judge and still be called a judge. Really. He is the only judge who never takes Israel into warfare. No one follows him. Every other judge is a leader of some sort that people follow him. He is not followed by anyone. Even Israelites turn him over to the enemies. He is the nothing. Every fight he gets involved in is entirely based on personal vendetta. Okay? There's no nationality, no concern about covenant, no concern about his people. It's just he gets mad at people and they fight for him. Okay.
What would you say about the end of the story then?
I mean, this one or this one? Oh, Samson? Oh, yeah. It says he killed more in his death than his life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's worth more dead than alive. Okay. Yeah. The narrator actually makes the point for you. It's like, he's worth more dead. He killed more dead than he was alive. Yeah, he's worth more dead than alive. End of commentary on Samson. So, okay, I would say, okay, if you're probably not familiar with Ehud and Deborah as much, I think, okay, Gideon might be fun, Jephthah. I'll try to pull off those 4. Skip Abimelech, Samson, Othniel.
And we are doing the 2 epilogues.
And we'll do the epilogue 2.
Oh, 2.
We can't do epilogue 1. It's too long, and let's see how much time we have. Let's skip Othniel. Let's do Ehud. Okay, the reason I say this is a spiral, when you talk about a spiral, initially you don't notice it. Okay? So Othniel is a perfect judge. This is the second one. And most people don't notice anything wrong with this story. The reason I think something's wrong with the story is because I buy into the spiraling idea, that the judges are getting worse, and there's something really off is happening in this story. So you read it yourself, and you can decide for yourself whether something's really off or not. Okay? Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera, the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him to tribute to Eglon. Now, Eglon means calf. Oh, by the way, previous part of the verse, it tells him that you notice that he's really fat. So he's a fat calf. Okay, haha. What do you do with a fatted calf? You kill the fatted calf. Okay, it's just kind of a Hebrew joke going on there. Okay. Now, Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, about this long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. Okay. Now, right thigh because he's left-handed. So they will search your left, not your right, because right-handed people can grab swords like this. But it's really hard to grab a sword like this, I think. So for whatever reason, he's left-handed. He can get away with this. He presented a tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. Oh, right here. Fat Eglon. Good. Fatted calf. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. Go away. He's by himself now, okay? But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you. The king said to his attendants, Leave us! And they all left. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, I have a message from God for you. And as the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade. He's pretty fat. Okay? And his idea is that, bowels discharged is not the right it's okay. It's NIV is being nice to you guys. The literal translation is the dirt came out. Okay, so yeah. Ehud did not, okay, that's an important fact, by the way. You actually need to know this thing in there, because this is actually kind of funny. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. So you can't see the sword anymore. He is so fat, the fat closed in over the sword. Okay, and he's now, basically defecating all over the place. And then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. Now this is a critical information, because what happens next? After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. And they said, he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace. Whew. Okay. They waited to the point of embarrassment. Wow, it's a big one, King. Oh my goodness. That's the royal leaving of a dump there. And they couldn't wait any longer. Like, okay, the king's been there a long time. That was a serious load there. And then when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. Then they saw their lord falling to the floor dead. Now this is critical, because while they waited, Ehud got away. And he passed by the stone images and escaped to Sarah. Okay. What's that story about? First of all, it's meant to be funny. It's a funny story. Okay, the details are especially okay. That the feces came out and the sword disappears. Can nobody see it? That way, the servants peek in. Oh, he's sitting there. Okay, he's just stinking up the place, but that's what the king usually does. So, okay, it's embarrassing. It's hilarious. Is there something wrong with Ehud? Do you feel like something's wrong with Ehud?
He's destroying his enemies.
Yeah, he's destroying his enemies. Not a problem. God helped him.
In his own way. That's the question. Is this a godly way of destroying his enemies?
It's a good question. So, are there questions about assassination and its ethics?
I have a message from God for you. Seems very.
I have a message from God for you. Right? Okay. So, it's hilarious. It's funny. There is, as you're reading this, you feel a little gross. There's a little bit of voyeurism, like I'm watching in the description, and I'm laughing at somebody getting their guts sliced open and leaving feces all over the place, and I'm actually thinking this is funny. Right? There's a little bit of that going on. So, different readers will have different interpretation of this passage. People say, that's no problem at all. So some people say, okay, things don't go wrong officially until Gideon. Whereas other people think, this is a little weird, and it's a little off of what's happening, and is assassination really an ethical thing? Okay, like I said, it's a spiral, so it might spiral down slowly, or may not spiral at all, and some people might think. We're just supposed to laugh at Eglon. We're really not supposed to have any pity for him, because he's a bad dude. But remember, he's not a bad dude. Who's the bad dude in the book of Judges? Who is the bad guy in the book of Judges? The Israelites. Remember, who is the evil people in the book of Judges? So all these bad dudes are God's servants, God's tools. God sent them to oppress the Israelites. If you get the dynamics correctly, okay, you'll begin to see. Wait a minute, the bad guys are Israelites. Who's Eglon? Eglon's not great. He's a jerk, but God's letting him rule over the Israelites because the Israelites rebellion. So I don't know about this. I have a message from God for you, business. Okay. Let's keep going.
Charles, your list didn't include Shamgar. Is Shamgar not actually a judge?
He's a minor. There's quite a bunch of minor judges that have one line over them.
Okay.
There's more than, I think there are like 6 or 7 of them. In between, there's like 1 line, 2 lines, and that's it. There's nothing said about them.
And then, why did you say, God raised up a judge for the Israelites if that's the case?
Why does God raise up horrible judges? That's a good question. Let's answer that at the end. How's that? Because it's gonna get worse. Okay, Ehud is nothing. Ehud's pretty decent, I think, right? It's like that's it. He assassinates a guy, and it's kind of gross. Okay, he's actually pretty decent. Let's look at this guy. Let's look at Deborah. Now, Deborah is an interesting one. I think once again, Deborah is portrayed as a great kind of a leader behind the general. Barak is the general, and Deborah is kind of the prophetess, and she's telling him to do stuff, and we don't really get anything wrong with Deborah until the last little bit, where you feel like something's off about her. Okay, once again, not explicit. Okay. So this is the story of Barak is fighting Sisera. The Sisera is the general of the bad guys who are oppressing the Israelites. Oh, I see, Israelites, the bad guys. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, or Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of the Heber the Kenite. Okay, get that story straight, okay? Heber is the ally of Jabin, king of Hazor, who is the king over Sisera. So he went to the house of somebody, of his king's ally, which means by every ancient rule, it is protection. This is a place of protection. You protect your guests. You protect people who come in to your tent. Okay. A red wedding not aside. Nobody reads. Yeah, okay, somebody does. Okay, red wedding aside, everybody understands in the ancient world the protection offered to guests. Okay. Jael went out to meet Sisera. This is interesting. This is not even a person coming to you. It's she goes out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. Oh. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by, asks you, is anyone in there? Say no." Okay. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. And she drove the peg through his temple into the ground. Now that's a little redundant here, and he died. I think it's pretty clear. Okay, so you have the tent peg that goes right through the head. Okay, he's nailed to the ground there. Bloody book. Judges. We don't know why Jael does this. Jael's not an Israelite. We don't know why she does this. Is she she's kind of a homicidal maniac? We don't know. What clearly has happened is she deceived him and brought her into, and broke all kinds of rules about hospitality. The hosts don't kill the guests in their sleep. It's just not what happens, okay? So we have some questions about this ancient world. Ancient world, we would be saying, whoa, what is a weird behavior for Jael? That's bizarre. It's breaking all kinds of conventional rules. But, she's not an Israelite, so what's an Israelite going to say about this? Okay. What is the Israelite view of Jael's behavior? So, here is chapter 5. Deborah goes into a song. And it's a very interesting song. She comes out she's really excited. She's talking about praising all the people, all the soldiers who came to war, and then cursing those people who didn't come. And then she starts talking about Jael. And this is her perspective, her interpretation of the events that just happened. "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women." She's awesome. We love her. There's obviously zero ethical nuance here. Like, why'd she do that? Okay. "He asked for water. She gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, he brought him curdled milk." Whether this is Hebrew, this is poetry. This is Hebrew parallelism. I had enough space to lay it out, a versification. But you can catch that, even in English. "He asked for water, she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg. Her pen peg, right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell, there he lay. At her feet he sank, he fell, where he sank, there he fell, dead." Is that what happened? When the narrator tells a story once, and then another character in the story tells a story again, it's always interesting to compare. Because the narrator is asking you to do comparisons. Here we get the narrator's story. What's the difference?
In the first one, he's asleep and exhausted.
Yeah. In the first one, he's completely defenseless. He's lying there, sleeping. This one, is he standing? There's a lot of falling going on, right? There's almost kind of a slow motion falling that's going on. He's like, and he fell and lay, sank, fell, lay, sank, and then dead. There is definitely exaggeration, for poetic purposes, sure, poetic license. I think it looks probably to Deborah's mind, Sisera standing up and getting crushed is more exciting than being asleep there and getting crushed. It's just not as much fun. We want to valorize the woman. Let's say he took her on while she's standing up. She took him on while he was standing up. A little bit better story. Let's keep going on this bizarre poem. Next verse. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. This is Deborah talking about Sisera's mom. Okay.
Who isn't in the first narration?
Who's not in this narration? This is obviously a storytelling. She's imagining.
Yeah.
She's imagining the story. She's imagining a situation with Sisera's mom. Okay? Why is she imagining a story with Sisera's mom? No, we'll figure it out. Behind the lattice, she cried out, "Why is this chariot so long coming?" Well, we know why. Okay? "Why is the cloud of his chariots delayed?" The wisest of her ladies answer her, No, indeed. She keeps saying to herself. She gets her maidservant to say something, and then Deborah changes her mind and said, No. She's saying this to herself. Probably a better dramatic effect. Are they not finding and dividing the spoils, a woman or two for each man, colorful garments as plunder for Sisera, colorful garments embroidered, highly embroidered garments for my neck, all this as plunder? What is she doing in the story? She's envisioning Sisera's mom as she's sitting there waiting for Sisera to come back, and Sisera's obviously late because he's not coming back. So, situational irony, right? We all know Sisera's dead, but Sisera's mom doesn't, and she's there talking about, oh yeah, we're going to get some really good plunder out of this and good spoils, and a woman or two, and I'm going to get some nicely embroidered garments. Okay. Now, is this a commentary on Sisera's mom, or is this a commentary on Deborah? And if so, because first of all, we don't know what's going on with Sisera's mom at all. This is just Deborah making it up, making things up. And by making this up, what is she doing?
She's gloating.
She's enjoying herself. Oh yeah, gloating. Oh yeah. She's gloating. She's imagining, and we never quite get that moment, right? But we know it's coming. When the news comes in, your son is dead. Right? She's enjoying the irony, the incongruity between her sitting there anticipating all these spoils and plunders, and the fact that her son's dead. There's a tent peg through his skull, and that's what Deborah is doing in this song.
Well, let me jump in and say, the gloating seems negative, but when you hear that description, you think to yourself, well, the alternative doesn't seem very good either. Like, if Sisera had won,
right,
it doesn't seem very good.
Right. So it's not, once again, it's not a black and white thing. It's a gray thing. They should have won. It's good that they defeated Sisera, except to say she is kind of off. She is definitely somebody who she's enjoying the suffering of her enemies. Okay, if that's kind of God's people thing, okay. But the narrator is emphasizing this aspect, that this is somebody who is just, we won, we don't, Jael's great, she killed the right guy. Do we care that she broke the laws of hospitality and of the ancient convention? We don't care one bit. In fact, more brutal the better. So she's a kind of a bloodthirsty person. And then she goes further, and we have her and her song that's really about creating a mental image that is totally unnecessary. Right? This last part is totally unnecessary. But she creates this because she wants to enjoy the suffering of Sisera's mother. Yeah. I want to get it. So once again, readers respond differently to this. Some people reach 4 and 5 and go, yeah, more power, hit them again. And other people read this and think, Deborah's a little off. And it really depends on how you see God in the Old Testament. Is he a cruel nationalistic God? If you're on the right side, you crushing the other side, doesn't matter how? Or is there kind of a concern for the rest of the world, nuance for people that show up, and especially given in the book of Judges, where the main bad guys are the Israelites. Okay? it's really easy to read let's put it this way. If all the judges were heroes, if it ends with a great judge at the end, it's all heroes, then I don't think I'd be reading it this way. I'd be like, okay, we need to rethink about how we view God. But if it's a spiral, if it trends downward, then you start looking for hints that some things are wrong in these earlier judges. Okay. Question?
So when Ehud said this is a message from God, was he taking a bit of liberty with God's name there?
Possibly. If the ancient world has an injunction against assassinations, then there's ethical problems with what he was doing. And he's using, this is for God. God, he basically, why does he not trust God to deliver Israelites without an assassination? Just call the people together and fight. Why does he need to resort to subterfuge? Right? And once again here, the killing of Sisera is entirely unnecessary. The battle's over. Right? They already won. And he's a poor broken man, exhausted, asleep, and his own ally crushes his skull, and then Deborah's like, yeah, and you know what? I hope his mother suffers too. It's like,
what had, like, earlier in the story, what did it do with, like, when she says, like, because the general is like a coward.
refuse to go, right?
Yeah, and so it's like
a woman will get get the thing, yeah.
Yeah, so how does that deal with this?
So very interesting. So I would say, but even Barak is also, he's a wimp, right? He doesn't have any faith. So you notice there are no faithful people in this story. Okay, Israelites are not the heroes. Israelites are the enemy. They're the ones that break against God. So their leaders are flawed, badly flawed leaders. Now Barak is one of the more brave generals in the book of Judges. Okay, actually no, Jephthah's pretty good, except Jephthah's just sad in a different way entirely. Jephthah's one of the saddest stories. But compared to Gideon, the next guy, Barak is like macho and tough and bold. Okay.
I guess the question I was wondering was the relationship between Deborah being a prophetess,
yeah,
and like knowing that a woman would get Sisera,
yes,
but also like how she like enjoys it, and I don't know. Like,
right. So we need to avoid the black-white thinking. Gray is what's going on here. Is Deborah a prophetess? Yes. Is she a judge? Yes. Is she called by God? Yes. Is she serving God's purpose? Yes. Are there problems, I think, with the way she views the world? Yes. Is her enjoyment and her bloodthirstiness towards Sisera and his mother, is that problematic? I think so. And I think the text is actually showing you that. But it'll become clearer once you hit Gideon, because there the spiral becomes very clear. Okay, this downward thing, we're on a downward trajectory, becomes very clear. Okay.
So it's like basically like the people themselves were called by God and to follow his plan to carry things out well, but
yes,
it's just their like sinful natures coming out, and they're taking what God has called them to do and taking it kind of the wrong direction.
That sounds like the story of God's people. Sounds like the church, right? But you're saying exactly right. You're exactly right. Which is, God calls people, God empowers them, and they're going to do things their way. And in the way they do things, they're going to reveal their own prejudices. They reveal their own corruption. So,
which is what the book of Judges is showing us.
Exactly.
Just so for us, we can learn from what they did.
Well, it's a part of the storyline of the failure of the people. So people are failing, and they're revealing their corruption again and again, and God remains faithful to delivering his people. But he gives them the leader that they deserve.
Does any of this break up with Hebrews attributing faith to
Samson even?
Samson, Barak, Gideon, and Jephthah?
Yeah, I think it all works. They all have faith in God, without a doubt. So no black and white thinking, right? These are faithful people. They believe in God. Gideon definitely believed in God, but it took him a while. Okay, and that's the next one. This guy is a problem figure. So Gideon's complaining about things going wrong, and the God came to talk to him directly. And this is where you will find that Gideon is a coward in comparison to Barak. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joab. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And pardon me, my Lord, Gideon said, "If the Lord is with us, Notice he doesn't. Notice with you. No. If it's with us, no. Because I want to be with you and I want to make you fight. And he already says, no. Let's have a discussion about the past here, folks. The Lord's with us. Why does this happen to us? Where are his wonders that our ancestors told us when they said, "Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?" But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The Lord returned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. And am I not sending you?" This sounded like Moses all over again, right? "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." Young kid, small clan. Got it. The Lord said, "I will be with you." Straight out of Moses, right? "And you will strike down the Midianites, living none alive." Gideon replied, "If I now have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. Pardon? Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." The Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of the Lord said, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flowed from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. Okay, so cool trick, right? The burning of the animal, wow, instant barbecue, cool. Okay, and totally worked. Gideon says, "Okay, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Yes." Okay, so he's convinced that this is God. And then he goes out and in the middle of the night he tears down an Asherah pole, and then finally he tries to rally the troops. And God calls him to rally the troops, and then he does something else. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor." He wants another sign. So threshing floor, it's a area, no grass. It's not a grassy area. It's all compact dirt, right? "If there's dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." Now stop right there. If you put a wool fleece on a threshing floor, a compact dirt floor, and then overnight, in the morning when you get up, what's going to happen? What is supposed to happen?
The ground would have dew because it would cool down faster than a fleece would.
Have you gone outside, like you have a carpet outside? Lay out your carpet outside tonight. Maybe get up in the morning and see what's going on outside. Let's say you put it on a concrete floor.
It's wet.
The carpet's going to be wet. The ground around is going to be dry. Okay? Because the ground dries up quickly. The carpet's going to get all wet. Right? You know that. Yeah. So, Gideon rose early next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Is this a miracle? No, it's not a miracle. He's an idiot. He asked for the wrong thing. Okay? Now, how did you know that? Because he does it again. He reversed it and said, he's like, "Oh, oops." He said, "Oops." That's how you know, because he did it again the other way. He says, "Don't be angry with me, God. Let me make just one more request, one more test of the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and the ground be covered with dew." See, the ground is covered with dew and the fleece is dry. That's a miracle. And it happened. Okay. So you get stories like this. That God has come and told Gideon to do things. He gave the initial miracle, a sign, awesome, and he keeps asking for more. There's kind of this very fearful aspect of Gideon. And then he's not very bright. It's I think, just taking a shot at Gideon here. The narrator's not being very nice to Gideon. It's like, oh, he's a moron. All right, fine. Okay. I know that people teach this passage as being about fleecing, and you should do things like this. I know people teach this. Once you read it this way, you realize, no, we don't want to do that. The Bible is not emphasizing this as a thing to do. It is the mark of a person with no faith. And when you fleece, do make sure they fleece properly. No, you're not supposed to be fleecing at all, actually. Okay, but this is kind of making fun of Gideon, and then we really know where the problem goes. Keep reading the story if you have a chance. Gideon becomes this guy who, once he wins a couple of victories, becomes kind of tough. Becomes a tough dude. And it ends with this. Gideon made a golden. They offered him some gold because he did this for the Israelites, and he turned into an ephod, placed in Ophrah, his town, and all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. It became a snare for Gideon and his family. He became an idolater. He created an idol in which the Israelites all worshipped at. So he's the first the first judge to actively lead Israel into idolatry.
So he won a bunch of, in the middle of that, he won a bunch of battles.
He won some battles, yeah. Yeah, he won some battles, very miraculous battles. That was the one where he, smack over the jars and the Midianites killed each other. Mass confusion kinds of battles. He does something like that. He starts off cowardly and turns out to be kind of the machismo guy and challenging people. It's kind of very interesting personality, and it ends with idolatry. So,
Why did he do that?
it's a good question. Yeah, why did he do that? I don't know.
What's an ephod?
So it's ephod. An ephod is a shoot. What is an ephod?
Sometimes it's like a tunic, sometimes it's like a brass.
Yeah, it's clothing kind of thing. I don't know why they would worship it. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's made out of gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They also wanted to make him king, and he's
He
like,
said
no, neither me nor my sons will be king. And
Yeah, but then
his first son,
so Abimelech.
the king.
Abimelech, my father is king.
My father is
Yeah.
king, yeah.
So Gideon is a clear-cut situation in which the judges are spiraling downward. Let's skip Abimelech, his son, which is a complete disaster. We'll go to Jephthah. Okay.
The last total disaster.
Sorry. Jephthah is a sad story. Okay. The Spirit of Yahweh came on Jephthah. He's crossed Gilead and Manasseh and passed through the Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to Yahweh, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be Yahweh's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns, and from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Karamim, thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. You notice narrators when they repeat things? Okay, like, she's an only child. We get that. Oh, she has no other son and daughter. Okay. All right, we get that. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to Yahweh that I cannot break." My father, she replied, "You have given your word to Yahweh. Do to me just as you promised. Now that Yahweh has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said. And he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. How are we supposed to understand this story? I've heard sermons on how we should always fulfill our vows.
You shouldn't have made the vow in the first place.
So let me just point this out. God called Jephthah to do all this. What was Jephthah doing in verse 30? If you give me the Ammonites, which God says, I'll give it to you, I will sacrifice whatever comes out of my house. What's the underlying assumption there? Actually, there's multiple underlying assumptions. Assumption number one, you can motivate God by giving him sacrifices. Number one. Number two, God is motivated by human sacrifices. Let's just stop at those two thoughts right there and stop and think, does Jephthah have any idea who God is? Does he have any clue who God is? So what we're getting at is, initially we're getting at people like Ehud, who are their lack of trust, so they rely on techniques such as assassination. Okay, Deborah is a little bit, what should we say, overly excited about killing the enemy. Okay, Gideon basically lacks faith and needs a lot of signs, and eventually gets into adultery. By the time we get to Jephthah, we have leaders in Israel who have no idea who God is. They have no idea what the covenant's about anymore. Okay? God hates child sacrifice. If you read Leviticus, it is just an abomination before God. God absolutely hates it. It says, you shall not do this Canaanite thing. But what's going on here is Jephthah is now thinking that God is a Canaanite god. He is like the gods of Canaan, who have no problem with human sacrifices. In fact, likes human sacrifices. And he thinks that he can make a deal with God. God called me to do this. You know what? To really make sure you will fulfill what you promised, I will offer you a person. That'll make you happy. Right? That'll make you happy. Complete misunderstanding who God is. Okay? But it's really sad because he doesn't know. And what happens is there's just this tragedy at this end of the story, and the echo to Genesis is clear, right? The Genesis to Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham moves to Canaan, and God says, "Well, here's Isaac, your only son, your only son. Sacrifice him to me." By the way, he's the covenant, right? The covenant was come through him. Sacrifice him to me, and Abraham says, "Okay, great." Yahweh is one of those Canaanite gods that demand sacrifice of children. But he also promised that covenant is going to come through him. So according to the book of Hebrews, Abraham believed in the resurrection. That God's going to resurrect Isaac after I kill him. Fine. He gets up there and God says, "No, I'm not into this at all. Thank you for sharing, but I am totally not into killing kids. Okay, I'm not doing this. Okay, you're not going to do this. Don't do it." And then the revelation to Moses makes it painfully clear, don't do things like this. Don't be like the Canaanites. So here we have the story, we have an echo to Genesis. The difference, of course, is Abraham was being tested because he didn't know. Jephthah should have known, but he didn't. It is a people and a leadership that's utterly corrupted by the Canaanite culture. So that Jephthah, out of a desire to please God, killed his only daughter. And God is probably mad as heck. But because this is Judges, not Abraham, no angels show up to say, "Stop." Okay. It's a tragedy. But the tragedy of a leader of the people of God who knows so little of this God that he will seek to manipulate God and earn God's favor by doing something that God absolutely hates. Any questions on Jephthah?
In addition to that analysis,
Yep.
in response to those who would produce a sermon that's about keeping all vows, wasn't there a sacrifice that you could make if you made a rash oath?
Yeah, there is. But the point being here is, would it be okay if Jephthah said, "Sorry, oops, sorry"? Absolutely. Yes.
Well, why does it have to focus on like her not being able to marry?
Yeah, because so unfortunately this is a patriarchal period, so the women's worth are through their child rearing, and the fact that she has no if you produce children, you are part of a line that gets remembered, and if you don't, you're forgotten. So his line is cut off. Jephthah's line is cut off. His daughter's line is cut off. There's no progeny, no future for them in the people of God.
So when he
Yeah.
when
Does
he
that make
said
sense? Yeah.
when he said I'm gonna sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my door, what
Yeah.
did he think was gonna come out?
He's probably a servant.
One of the servants.
He was hoping a servant.
Okay.
Or
He has plenty of servants.
there are animals in the houses too, right?
Possibly, but like a dog running out?
Or like a
Probably
goat.
not. Maybe a goat. Well, he was obviously being indiscriminate.
Yeah.
He didn't care.
No, I've heard that the Hebrew can be read like an either or for the sacrifice. Like either I will give something up or I will burn it or something. And that this ending could be the fact that she remained a virgin her whole life.
Yeah,
versus
I read that too.
sacrificing her.
Yeah, they're trying to save God.
You don't buy that.
I don't buy it because it's actually not, the Hebrew doesn't allow for that.
Okay.
The reason for this is that the reason people are reading it that way is because they don't understand the book of Judges. They think that God approves of this. And if they think that, then they go, well, God can't possibly approve of this. Therefore, they're trying to save God again. Of course, if you read the book of Judges properly as a ever downward spiral, and that this is a revelation of the corruption of his people, then God doesn't approve of this. Okay, and I think it's clear. Oh, I know it's clear. But when narrator's going, she was an only child. Except for here, he had neither son or daughter. You're like, oh my God, this is horrible. You know, and you're grimacing along with the narrator, and God is like, oh, please, okay. And you know, Jephthah, get a brain. Okay, but they're all being so pious. Oh, daughter, I made a vow to God I can't reply, I can't go back on. And the daughter says, well, my father, you made a vow, so you just gotta go do it. They're all being so good at doing something so bad. Right? They're faithful, pious people, but because their lack of knowledge of who God is, they end up piously doing horrific things. So I think that's the story that's being given here. And because they're so pious, you just heartbreak for them. It's like, oh, but Leviticus, go read Leviticus. Just right there. It says no child sacrifice. Stop it. So anyway, so that's the problem.
It's not too far from ours. I mean, sitting there and cringing, but
Yeah.
I'm just remembering that people made bullets in the U.S. with John 3:16 on them.
Why?
Apparently, pious people doing what they thought was the right thing.
I couldn't even begin to understand that.
Exactly.
Okay.
But that's just what's going on
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
It's not too far.
Right.
And you hear about Pat Robertson talking about the devil taking over Haiti. I mean, this is our language today
Yeah.
as well.
And when you don't have, and this is a cry for knowledge, that the people of God have forgotten God and God's teaching, and when you have that situation, you end up with a situation like this, where people are like doing what they think is right. They're even trying to follow God, but following it in such a horrific way. So the need for teaching, the need for proper understanding of who God is, shows up in this story critically. Let me jump to this. So we did Samson already. We kind of talked about Samson. And like I said, you can't get worse than Samson. Epilogue 1, we stopped talking about judges. And then we have the failure of the Levites. The Levites, the group that was supposed to teach, kind of a special tribe among the Israelites. They fail. And then the Epilogue 2 is the worst story in the Bible. I'll summarize it for you. A Levite is going to get his concubine. His concubine ran away back home, so he goes and gets her, and they need to leave. But the father of the concubine says, "Oh, keep staying." And finally, he finally takes concubine to leave, but they leave too late in the day, so they have to end up staying at some place in the tribe of Benjamin. Because overnight, and of course, law of hospitality, they were invited by this older man to their house. Of course, immediately that happens, a whole group of the townsfolk came and knocked on the door and says, "Hey, can you bring out that guy out, the Levite? We'd like to rape him." Okay, you read Judges, which is right out of Sodom and Gomorrah, right, where the angels came to visit Lot, and they say, "Hey, those two guys, we'd like to come out and rape them." So this is the story, once again, but except this is Benjamin, this is Israelite. Okay, this is a case where Israelites have actually become Sodom and Gomorrah. They have become Canaanites. This is now not merely individuals, this is a group. This is the townsfolk's men who says, any new guys who come in here is fresh meat, and we get to do with them as they wish. By the way, there's no good guys in the story, okay? So they're knocking on the door, they're rocking the door, the Levite says, all right, the heck with that, throws the concubine out. Do with her what you guys want to do. And then he goes to bed. The concubine's out there all night. Okay. Next morning, opens the door. The concubine's lying there with the door, with a hand reaching across the threshold, and in probably what is probably the coldest sentence in all of the Bible, he says to her, "Get up." She doesn't get up. He picks her up, puts her on a horse, gets back home, and this is where in the story it is incredibly vague. It never says she actually died. Okay? But he cuts her up into 12 pieces. Now she's dead. Okay? It never actually says she died. We don't know who killed her. Okay? But we know that she gets cut into 12 pieces, gets sent to the 12 tribes of Israel. Everybody gets a piece. Like, what the heck is this? They gather, like, wow, they've never seen anything like this before. They gather at this place, and the Levite tells his story. Okay, this is what happened. And he, of course, tells them that they killed her. We don't know if that happened or not. Then the people said, okay, well, these men need to be arrested. We're going to be just about this. So they asked the Benjamin to produce the men from that city. Because Benjamin says, no, they're our tribe, they're part of our tribe, you can't do that. So the rest of Israel waged war on Benjamin. And they attack once, they lose, attack twice, they lose. The third time through a subterfuge, they go in and they slaughter them, and they wipe out almost all of the Benjamites. It's like 600 men left. Then they all wept, because we destroyed one of the tribes of Israel. Okay. So they said, what do we do? Well, we made a vow that we would never let our daughters marry any Benjamin guy. Because we killed off all of them. We killed off their wife, their kids. There's 600 Benjamin guys, single guys left. Okay. How are they going to produce? How can they repopulate? Okay. We need to figure that out. So since we all made a vow, there's this one place in Jabesh Gilead where they didn't send anybody. Okay. Go there, take their daughters. So they did that. And then, that's not enough, by the way. So they just grabbed them and took them. And that's not enough. We also have a regular spring rite in which the girls come out and do dancing. You can just hide in the bushes and grab them and take them. And that's how the story ends. The book of Judges. It's gruesome. It's completely amoral. There are no good guys. We don't know how you even start thinking about this story. Okay? Like, seriously? They started with one woman's death and become now a slaughtering of one of the tribe of Israel, then lead to pretty much kidnapping and rape of a whole series of other women. And that's all going to be okay. That's where Israel is at the end of Judges. And this phrase shows up again and again. 17:6. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. 18:1. In those days, Israel had no king. 19:1. In those days, Israel had no king. 21:15. In those days, Israel had no... This is the final line of the book. Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. You need a king. Okay. The people... We've given up on the people. The people have rebelled, and when they went to Canaan, they become Canaanites. They're utterly incapable of living out what God has in mind. So what they need is now a leader who will come along and enforce and revamp and re-educate and transform this people. That is now absolutely necessary.
Interesting. The conclusion is not literal, but it's the correct. I agree, it's correct conclusion. Is there a verse that says that, or is that just the conclusion?
So that's my conclusion. I think the storyline repeats that pretty clearly. That they're not doing child sacrifice. That they're now the homosexual rapists that are sanctioned by the town. Okay, systematic.
Sodom and Gomorrah were the Canaanites?
Yeah, they're Canaanites.
Okay.
Yeah, so systematic homosexual rape of visitors.
I just isn't Saul from the tribe of Benjamin?
Yes.
So does that have anything to do with the Benjamin stuff?
It's interesting, isn't it? The Saul came out of that tribe, and there's some connection between First Samuel and Judges. The town Jabesh Gilead, he just doesn't need to rescue them. So there's some kind of connection there, but it's not terribly clear exactly the relationship there. The text is, they're echoes, but there's no explanation of why, for example, why Saul comes out of Benjamin, or if that's even a problem. It's just not mentioned.
Samuel does count as a judge, right?
Yes. So, but he's not in the book of Judges.
Right. Okay.
What's interesting about that is that you actually have a revival of judges in the book of Samuel. So Eli and then Samuel is the final judge, right? So we have Eli, who's not that great, and then Samuel, who seems to be leaving a kind of a recovery, but the recovery started by Hannah, right? The prayer of a pious woman. She produced the child that brings about the Renaissance of Israel. But that's not in the book of Judges, because the book of Judges doesn't want to end there.
She also kind of does child sacrifice correctly.
Yes, if you want to put it that way. But my point would be that in the book of Judges wants to end here. It wants to end at the absolute nadir. And then the book of Samuel then really is setting up the kings. instead of the kings. So you have a couple judges, Eli, you have Samuel, but really they're just getting things going so we can get monarchy going again, because this is where the hope is. And we'll talk about whether the Bible is pro-king or anti-king next time. But one thing to think about is the book of Ruth. And I know that I'm not talking about book of Ruth because it's not part of the storyline, but the book of Ruth is a fantastic way to close off the book of Judges, which is why I think whoever wrote the book of Ruth intentionally linked it to the book of Judges. Right? It begins with, in the days when Judges reigned, a Levite traveling from Bethlehem, which is how the book ends, how this epilogue 2 and 1 all end. All have to do with Levi and Jerusalem. So read that, okay? Read epilogue 1, epilogue 2. They have to do with Levites and Bethlehem. And then when you go to Ruth, it's happening all over again. And you think, oh my God, he's leaving Bethlehem. It's going to be a disaster. And it is. And then there's a return to Bethlehem. And everybody in there knows the law. Read Ruth with careful attention to detail about how threshing laws work. Boaz knows the rules. Okay? So you have people who are absolutely and completely ignorant about the covenant. And then you have some quiet people living in Bethlehem who knows. And from that quiet obedience to the covenant comes David, the greatest king. Right? So so Judges is that disaster upon disaster, and then there's always the time, and where there's no light whatsoever. Ruth is that light in the period of Judges, where it's like, you know where the light is? Is among people you never heard of, living quietly somewhere on some farm in some place, and they're just quietly living out the ways of God. And their faith, Ruth's faithfulness, Boaz's faithfulness, his concern for propriety and following the covenant properly, and both of them, you know, and they produce David. So that's how that works.
Do you think there is meant to be a good, strong contrast then between Saul, Jabesh Gilead, Benjaminites, and Ruth and Boaz, quiet other, like, they both have links to the Judges story,
right?
Sort of, but
right. I would say Ruth is the later. I would say so. Ruth is not part of the line, but Ruth is intentionally written with both Judges and Samuel in mind, without a doubt. It is just Ruth just oozes with goodness and kindness and loyalty, right? It's like God. It's that whole when God said to Elijah, you know, I have preserved myself, 5,000 have not bowed the knee to Baal. I have people you don't know about that have been faithful all this time, but they have not come to prominence, and they will. And Ruth is precisely that story. Without David, nobody would have heard of Ruth. It's just some random a Moabite woman who lives in Bethlehem, then marries some rich guy. But in how they did all that, we know, David. That's what's going to come from. He's come from that root. Okay. Questions, comments? I've gone too long. But at least I finished.
You did. Good. What time is it?
It's 12 o'clock.
Okay. If you need to leave, great. If not,
yeah.
I'll look for questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Can you just talk about how we got the story of Ruth? Like, because you're saying she was just like she would have been forgotten if it hadn't been for David.
Right.
So is it like David becomes a big figure and then people start asking where did he come from?
So I would you think about it this way. I mean, first of all, everything I'm saying is going to be speculative.
Yeah.
Because we have zero. Because of the way how the story ends, it ends with tracing the genealogy to David. Whoever wrote this wrote it during the time of David or later. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, but I would say the oral tradition would work really easily on this one. The story, you know. How did you and Daddy meet? Oh, wow. Well, the story gets told to Obed, to Jesse, mm-hmm. and by the time David comes along, people are interested in his genealogy, mm-hmm. right? The king. Where did you king come from? Oh, my dad was Jesse, just Obed. Oh, well, guess what? I have a Moabitess in my bloodline. Ooh, that's weird. We don't like Moabites. Right? You're not supposed to marry Moabites, actually, right? So that's kind of weird, and so you easily investigate and get the story straight, and then they tell the story, and somebody write it up. So I don't think that's a problem.
It's also a commentary on the richness of the oral tradition. I mean, like I barely know how my parents met, much
They didn't
less
tell
my
you?
grandparents. I mean, I know.
Yeah.
but Much less my grandparents or my great
Right,
grandparents.
right. But this is that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get to talk about Ruth, but Ruth is a cool story with a rocking ending.
Yeah.
All right, I mean, it's like, I know people read it and they kind of put some, they sanitize it a little bit. Yeah, but, what is she doing there? To the threshing floor. Okay, weird things are happening in that book that nobody wants to talk about. Okay? Yeah, she just goes there to sleep. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Wait till he's drunk and go to him, take a shower. It's like, okay, what's going on there? Okay, so I think that's a fun story. So, thanks for coming. Yeah,
Thank you.
have a good one. See ya.
I have two questions. The one that's going to be most continuous is I've read commentaries on Ruth, and they do indeed insist that nothing untoward happened there. They're like,
I think nothing untoward happened. I absolutely agree with you.
okay,
But that was not what's intended.
that was not.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to Boaz's knowledge of, as you say, the covenant, that he maintains propriety
Yeah.
in such covenantal language.
But Boaz says, I can't do this because there's somebody before you, somebody else who should marry you before me. Somebody who's a closer kinsman redeemer. I can't do this right now. Okay? So what she's doing is she's proposing marriage via sex.
Right.
Okay, so to me, it's really the same thing for them.
Yeah.
So she's proposing marriage, and he says, I'm really tempted. Thank you very much for the offer. There's somebody else closer. I can't do this, but I'm going to make this thing work. I'll check it out for you. Okay. So, yeah, so nothing untoward happened. I agree.
Right. Okay. all
Yeah,
right.
but
This was Naomi's idea. Right?
Naomi's idea, yep. Naomi's idea. Because Boaz's not going to do anything. You better go do something. He's just sitting around. Come on. So,
Okay, and then back to the tragedy. What role do you see in the narrative for the additional father, daughter, son-in-law time with the Levite and the concubine? And is that just to set up why they were late in leaving? Is it to add to the tragedy because
yeah.
there's a father who loves his daughter? Is it?
What is the point of that story? Yeah. What I think there's a bit of sense if they just left earlier, they would have missed it completely. So there was that. And then there's actually a choice that gets made, which is interesting. They were late in showing up, and they said, well, we can either go to this Benjamin city or we can go to a Canaanite city. And they actually say, let's go to the Benjamin city, it's safer. There's that, wow, did they ever make a bad choice? Okay, so think about a horror movie in which they're supposed to get to one place, but because they got delayed, they end up on this creepy motel off in the sign somewhere, and there's two choices between a good motel and a bad motel, and they think this is a good motel. Okay, it's all shiny and bright, and then horrible things happen. Okay? So think of horror pictures, and that the way they get set up is because of this. But also, I think there's some kind of power struggle going on and underlying that story. The concubine goes home. Why does the Levite, when Levite goes back, the father doesn't really want him to go? There's kind of this resistance.
You do get a sense of foreboding in there
Yes.
somewhere.
But it's unclear what's happening, except they're struggling. They're struggling over her, fighting over her, and she's kind of this non-person. That's her identity. Her name never shows up. And just kind of this non-person, and she's a daughter or concubine. Daughter or concubine. Her identity is really all that. And finally, just as a piece of meat. She just kind of gets degraded. So a kind of a sense of powerlessness about her the whole time, between the power struggle between her father and her husband. Yeah. So.
Should a Levite, of the priestly line, have had a concubine in the first place?
That's a good question. I don't think that was a major problem back then. Even though I think married to one person is usually the way to go, I didn't think they had a huge problem with concubines. Yeah. James.
Well, I had a question about the Numbers passage. We kind of just skimmed over it.
The what?
The Numbers 14 passage.
Numbers 14.
We covered it in the beginning.
Sorry. Yes.
Numbers 14.
Yes.
I was wondering, because I had read it recently, about what it means to show God with contempt or so.
This one?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I also like the metaphor, I don't know if you think of the metaphor of Egypt being where they used to live and Canaan where they're going. They want to go back to how they used to live, how they used to
Right. They want to be enslaved. They want to live. They prefer genocide and slavery to God's kingdom and God's rule. Yeah.
What does it mean to like show God with contempt? And it's like it's in the passage.
Right. Well, I think that's pretty contemptuous, don't you think? Well, so let me put it this way. So contempt. The word contempt, kalal, means usually in Hebrew means to be light. In the base form, and in the form in which you see someone, is usually to treat them as light. It's exactly the opposite of kavod. Kavod treats somebody to think them heavy, to think them as being light, to think somebody as a lightweight. Like, oh, he's a lightweight. He's a fluffy person. He's fluff. He is chaff. To think of people, we have all these images in English that works back then. Light things are not substantial. To think God as being light is to treat God with contempt. Now, why do they think God is light? One, he can't do it. Two, we made a deal with God, we can break it just like that. Breaking covenant with God is no big deal. Three, we like our previous lives better than this. Okay? We prefer slavery and being a victim of genocide than to be God's people. I think all of those things are incredibly contemptuous to God, right? Do you have a question? Maybe I'm not answering your question properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really, like,
Yeah.
I was just kind of like thinking about like contempt for the Lord. Also, like what that looks like. How we show that today towards Him. You know?
Oh, I mean like insult? Yeah.
Yeah, like just like, and that like it helped with like what the word meant in Hebrew too.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think people make the similar comments, which is we have a tendency to view God we don't view Him properly. You know, people say the dreams are too small. We view. I mean, we talked about last time. We have a problem viewing God as Yahweh. We view God as El Shaddai. We view God as a kind of a tribal God who handles our problems. We don't view God as somebody who can act in world history and radically alter the national geography, international geography. I think Egyptians have the same. I mean, the servants, the Israelites have the same problem. They still think of God as taking care of business, like giving us food and water, but they don't think of God as being able to take out the Canaanites, which is kind of odd because God took out the Egyptians. So it's kind of weird. But for some reason, that wasn't good enough.
Well, the other thing, hopefully, the helpful commentary. It seems like today we're a lot like the Israelites in terms of like fickleness. Like it's amazing how fickle people are. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like yay Barack Obama, and then it's like, oh no, we don't like Barack Obama. We like the Republicans.
Yeah.
Oh no, now we don't like the Republicans. We like Barack Obama. Oh, now we don't like it just seems like they're fickle.
Yeah.
You look at other countries too. They'll be really excited about a leader, and a few years later they'll be really down on him. And
Right.
like we want a standard from our leaders that we can't do ourselves.
Right. What they wanted was no obstacles. I think that's the key here, right? What they wanted was, they wanted to hear the news, the land is good and it's easy going. What they did not want to hear was, it's going to be difficult and we need to trust. So I think that's what they were fundamentally rejecting.
Yeah, I mean, here's the God who they just said, you know, Jesus revealed to them himself as Yahweh, the God who rescues you out of Egypt. That's the definition of Yahweh.
Yeah.
Is pretty much what He's told them, and they say, this looks too difficult. Let's go right.
Right.
So it just seems like they just don't get God, and I wonder. I mean, we're all pretty close in that as far as that territory goes.
Right. I think that's the. I mean, I think you're both right about the contemporary problem. It's the same problem, which is hearing God and having known God, what God has done in our lives. The idea that somehow we have to get through challenges. The new challenge is different from the old challenge. I think that's the problem. Is that here we have all this stuff coming up. Oh shoot! And then to actually, and fundamentally, I think living the life of faith is a problem. I don't think we want to. I don't think we want to live. They didn't want to, and I think we have resistance to living a life that's constantly challenges that requires us to trust God. That gets tiring, I think. Right? If you're just like, oh man, not again. Why don't we just have an easier life? But you know, we're set up for conflict. I think when we talked about Abraham, we're set up to sit before the world and have the world bless us or curse us. We're set up for conflict. And set up for a life that requires faith and trust. So it's not easy, but yeah, it's not easy.
Charles, do you think you want to write a book on Judges? Because I think that there's so much misinformation, especially in the Christian world.
There's a lot of book on Judges that's already out there. It's just nobody reads them.
Because it doesn't, I mean,
Yeah.
this reading is so much more exciting, right?
Yes.
The leaders, you're right. I mean, and we can use them to do nasty things to other people.
So I wrote this. This came out of my paper I wrote back in '94 on the theology of the Book of Judges. I wasn't coming up with this by myself. There's plenty of academic journals and books. Irony, the Book of Judges, Book of Judges. There's tons and tons of stuff on the Book of Judges that's out there. They're all sitting in Memorial Library, and nobody reads them. So, unless I can write it in a way that people are going to go, yeah, I would love to read it. The pastor should read this and then tell the story differently. It's going to take a while.
This is Left Behind.
Yeah, Left Behind is more popular.
Judge is the Left Behind series.
Which one would you want to read? So
Well, I was going to try to have you synthesize them.
maybe. So maybe I think you're right that we need a way to popularize this biblical theology, but it's hard. I mean, you know, like I said, the book I co-authored with Brooks Walkie, it's 1,000 pages, and it's hard slog. They all end up sounding that way, and maybe we just need to just really popularize it and strip away all the footnotes and such.
I mean, somebody stand up in the congregation and say, Israel are the bad guys in the Book of the Judges, have you noticed? I mean, just to say that opens the door to reading Judges.
But that is,
Yeah.
sometimes, I mean, Sean did a sermon series on Judges, and the theme was Israel is terrible. Israel needs a king.
Good. So he read it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, in undergrad, we did a 2-semester Bible study series, and this was just me reading it with a bunch of guys, and we're like, Judges, bad leaders. Joshua, other way around. Like what a leader should be,
Right.
albeit flawed.
Right.
And we didn't get it all with the nuance, but it's there to be
That's
read.
important. The nuance is where I think the real story is. Because I've heard a lot of preaching on how the judges were good and for what reasons, right?
But we were saying judges were bad. Joshua was the...
Well, not all the judges were bad.
Right. And, yeah,
No. I'm actually pushing really against that idea of somehow leadership lessons to be drawn from judges, because I don't think that's the story, whether they're good leaders or bad leaders, but just the extent of depravity, the extent to which you might be doing the pious thing, but having completely got the wrong end of the stick.
Right.
I read this beautiful, the postmodernist apologetic of the Bible in some ways, the Middleton and Walsh book, and they really hold up the epilogue to W. Reed as the ultimate story of everything having failed.
Yeah.
Land, kinship, people, understanding of power, the value of human life,
Yeah.
everything having literally touched the nadir.
Right.
And from that story is also drawn the human rights model of children and women, their status in society, somehow being the canary in the mine shaft.
Right.
If you're not treating them right,
Right.
something deeper is happening, and
Right.
you better watch out.
Right. Yeah,
And those things don't come out. I mean, it's these individual characters
Well,
and individual
I have never
journeys
heard
of
that
people.
chapter preached in my life. So that would be the starting point. It's
Final
like
Judges one.
the final chapter in the book of Judges. That story. Have you?
Sean did it.
Sean who? Sean.
Sean Spencer.
Sean Spencer.
Our pastor.
Excellent.
John's pastor.
Okay.
Where?
Where? Sorry.
Lake Trails. Here on west side of town.
Okay.
Okay.
Presbyterian Church, where I've been going for
Wow.
7 or 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah. His, the second sermon series he did when he came
He just came out of seminary.
The judges, he was like, I think it's
That's
like,
awesome.
He said something like 4 of my 5 least favorite stories in the Bible are in Judges.
Yeah.
But we're doing them all.
Okay.
So yeah, I think he may have wept telling the story of Jephthah because he's the father of daughters.
hmm
So that's how I found out about the sacrifice for the rash oath. I don't remember Levitical laws all that well.
Right.
He's like, the least he could have done was note that, like, oh, this is a rash oath,
Right.
and made the appropriate sacrifice and moved on.
Or just, you know what? I don't think God wants this. End of story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to
Yeah.
realize that he had done something horribly sinful in this setup, but instead he was just like,
Right. Kept
plowing
going.
ahead.
Right.
But not with a whole lot of detail the last few chapters, because it was really the wrap up to his real needs of king, what have they sunk into.
Right.
But it definitely wasn't.
Well, this is the doing my turn, so I've been reading Isaiah to give a background. And just reminds me of chapter 1. The head is sore and the whole body is rotten. From head to toe, everything's...
Yeah. Everything is very messed up. Yeah.
And that